everybody. Hello to our departmental research seminar. It's great to see so many of you. We have a couple of participants here in the room, and also I think 12, 13 speakers, participants on Zoom. So welcome to everybody. Today's talk is about syntax. I'm very excited about it. And as always, after this, we are going to head over to the linguistics common room for those of you who are here in person for a reception with some wine and some snacks. And now I hand the word over to my friend and colleague, Julio, who will introduce today's speaker to us. Julio, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially to Rajesh for joining us here. And it's a real honor, so thank you, Richard, for allowing me to introduce the speaker. So Rajesh Bhatt is one of those speakers that are easy to introduce because he needs no introduction whatsoever, right? He's a very famous syntactician based in the United States, more specifically at the University of Amherst, one of the most renowned departments in theoretical linguistics across the world. He received his PhD in 1999 from the University of Pennsylvania, which is also Chomsky's alma mater. He has worked in the field of syntax, especially the syntax-semantics interface, comparative syntax, also tree adjoining grammars, computational linguistics. Yes, an all-rounder. Okay. He has worked on a number of topics, including aspect and modality, comparatives, implicit arguments, and more specifically in the field of comparative syntax, he has actually done work into long-distance agreement, close conjunct agreement, and also correlative constructions. He's worked at a number of universities. He has been the recipient of NSF-funded projects, and he has published, as you can imagine, in the most prestigious journals, including Natural Language Linguistic Theory, Linguistic Inquiry, Natural Language Semantics, and so on and so forth. But we are here to listen to Rajesh. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming him. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that kind introduction. So the work that I'm going to be talking about today is co-authored, and I'm very happy to see that my co-author Sakshi has joined us. So I'll be giving the talk, but then in the discussion, both of us you should feel free to direct questions to both of us. And even though it's quite late, I think, where Sakshi is, I'm very happy that she has been able to join. Okay, so let's get going. If it's okay with you all, I would actually like it if you ask me questions in between, and I can sort of see if things appear in chat, or if you just raise your hand, or if you just start speaking, all of that would be good with me, because it would be, I think, just more interesting if you don't, like, if there's something that you just don't get, like, why are you doing this? Just ask me right away, okay? And of course, then you can ask me questions ask us questions at the end. Okay, so first let me just locate where this talk, what is this talk trying to do? So in syntax and also in semantics, I would say to a certain extent, the idea of licensing is a very commonplace notion. So what we know is there's a certain fact, right, which is certain elements will only appear, will only be good if something else happens, right? If there is, so for example, like nominative subjects in English seem to only appear when there is finite tense, and moreover when you are you're in a position that's like the subject of this finite tense. Okay, so that's a certain fact. Or for another fact might be that negative polarity items are only happy when they're in downward entailing environments. Okay, so these are facts. Now analytical treatments of these facts have tried to model these facts by saying, oh, okay, nominals must get case. If they don't get case, they're bad. So that's the licensing. And then when you say there's licensing, then there's a class of licensors, right? So finite T will license nominative, transitive V will license accusative, and prepositions will license accusative, and so on. Likewise, for the NPI idea, right, you might say, if you like the licensing idea, you will say, okay, there's a class of licensors. Negation is one, downward entailing operators are another, and so on. And if you have this element and you have an NPI, and that's licensing. Okay, so thinking in terms of licensing has been very productive, and in a way, all parts of linguistics, I think, use the licensing metaphor. But once you set up something in terms of licensing, theoreticians have always wanted to go further and ask why the licensing need exists. And then once you figure out why the licensing need exists, in many cases, you might make the licensing metaphor unnecessary. So one case where I feel we are moving towards something like that is with NPIs, because there people have come up with very interesting treatments where they say, look, let's look at how the NPI is set up. And once you understand how it's set up, then maybe its distribution will fall out from its meaning, from where it can be used. And then you don't have to say something about licensing, okay? But there are other, and also for case, people have come up with these cases, theories of case, where they're not talking about licensing. They're just saying, well, if you are sitting in this position, this is how you get pronounced. So it's not so much licensing, it's just realization, okay? So this is the background. Okay, so now one growth area in contemporary syntax is the treatment of person/animacy hierarchy effects. So I got my PhD in 1999, and it is a fact that at that point, we didn't really know how to do this. We looked at these things and we were like, oh my God, morphology, or something like, this is scary. This is where our tools fail. And I think one very heartening thing is that, and all of this in a way happened after Eulalia Bonet's dissertation was finally digested by syntacticians, and people realized, wow, this is everywhere. This is there in pretty much all the languages of Europe, but it's once you start looking, you find effects of the sort everywhere. So what I mean, what is this everywhere? That in English, you don't see this, right? In English, you can say things like, I saw him, he saw me, and as far the grammar doesn't seem to care about what the relative persons of the subject and the object are. But this is actually maybe when you look across languages, you find that a lot of languages care. And one domain where this has been studied a lot, so much that like non-syntactician colleagues of mine complain to me like, what, aren't you interested in anything else? Like you go to this conference and every paper is on the PCC. I want to kill myself. Like people get really upset, but we love the PCC. Syntacticians right now love the PCC. And okay, so here's an example. If you're not indoctrinated to the PCC, this is I'm going to change things. Okay, so in Greek, you can say they will send him to you. So the dative argument, which is actually coded in Greek as genitive, is second person, and the direct object is third person. And this is okay. Okay, but now in English, you can just as well say they will send you to him. Okay, but not in Greek. There are ways of saying this in Greek, but you cannot say it like this. So this is a kind of effect which I think people have realized, that you don't want to just say, oh, this is a surface filter, because this is pervasive. You see it in grammar, in languages which are set up very, very differently. So here we see it between the indirect object and direct object. There are languages where you see this between the subject and the object. Okay, so many Native American languages, many languages of America have that property where you kind of see those effects. Okay, so this has led theorists to say, basically there's an intuition that people have explored, which is that, look, these two arguments, they both need to be licensed, but it's okay if 3 doesn't get licensed, but there's something special about first and second person that really needs to be licensed. And that's why the 3/2 goes bad, but the 2/3 is good. Okay. So this is the licensing intuition. And this has been a very popular intuition in the entire literature on PCC and these person hierarchy effects. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at data from Copula Sentences in Hindi-Urdu, also a little bit in German, that display similar hierarchy effects. Our conclusion, following some other people, is that these hierarchy effects do not actually require licensing. But what in the process of doing that, what we find is, well, it's true that you don't need licensing to handle hierarchy effects, but you still need licensing. Okay, so the licensing intuition is correct. It's just not correct for hierarchy, but there are places in the grammar where it seems you still need hierarchy. Sorry, no. There are still places in the grammar where you still need licensing, but not for hierarchy. Okay, so let's get going. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to start with some German data, and I should caution you that the German data is variable. Not everyone gets the degradation varies across speakers. Some speakers don't get it, others get it almost as a star. But there is something to it that people have, the authors, we get this data from Kuhn, Keine, and Wagner, and they've shown through detailed experimental studies that there's a contrast between 3A and 3B. Okay, and let me actually clarify this. We'll be talking about a particular kind of copular sentence, which we will call the assumed identity copular sentence. So what you're saying here is something like, in this play, let's say we're talking about a play, I am playing him and he is playing me. Okay, and in this, what you find is, so 3A is unsurprising. In 3, the I is the subject, I am playing him, and the agreement goes with the subject, with I. Okay, but in 3B, something funny happens here. What we would expect with the relevant meaning is that you should get is here, but what speakers report is unhappiness. Neither is really good. Well, that's what Kuhn, Keine, those are the judgments reported by Stefan Keine and Michael Wagner. Okay. Okay. And so then how do you actually say, how would you go about actually say, oh, and one thing, one additional thing I should point out, that this string in 4 is in fact possible. Okay, it's not, but that's because German is a V2 language and you can topicalize. So this still only means I am him. This does not have any interpretation where 4 means he is me. Okay, so there is a way to express the thought in 3B, and it's a slightly indirect way of saying that, and that's in 5. Okay, but that's not what we're going for. And then there is one other point to note, which is that when first and the language doesn't seem to distinguish between first and second person with respect to this hierarchy. He is me was odd, but I am you and you are me, they are both acceptable. Okay, so that's the background. So just to give you a sense of their proposal is that unlike English, German copular sentences, and these copular sentences in particular, involve 2 nominatives. Okay, so in English, you see, if I was to say he is me, I say he is me, not he is I. Right? So while in German, both of these things are appearing in the nominative, and the idea is that this somehow makes them accessible to T, because T is only interested in things that are nominative. So it's accessible to T, and then once And then this is where the licensing idea comes in, and that's shown in 7. The core idea here is just that you have a participant which needs to be licensed by the probe, and the minus participant sort of blocks that, and consequently you get badness. Okay, so this is a licensing treatment of this. You can look at the participant over 3. That part, the intuition there is, well, participants need licensing, minus participant things like third person does not need licensing. And this is kind of like the idea, like in the Greek example, right? 2 over 3 was okay. And the idea there is third person direct object somehow can escape the calculus of licensing. Okay, so in this case, the third person, the lower third person is okay. 9 is a little bit more mysterious because here there are 2 participants, but it's still good. And here, people who have set up theories of this sort have talked about something called continuous agree as defined by Andrew Nevins, where the idea is that as long as you don't get a lower level feature, you can continue licensing. Okay, so we're not actually going to ultimately adopt this theory, so I'm not going to defend, motivate it much further. Okay, so now let's turn to Hindi, where the facts are similar, but unlike German, the facts are extremely sharp. So, you can sort of see that in German, the facts were variable enough that the authors, Kuhn, Keine, and Wagner, felt the need to do an experimental study because they were just not certain. But for Hindi, like Sakshi and I have given this talk many times, we don't get people, no one comes up to us and says, oh, but I can say this. These are like solidly bad cases. Okay, so let's start with this. Bollywood movies often, you could imagine one where people swap identities and pretend to be someone else, or this was also a theme in one Shakespeare play that I read as a child. So basically, so you can say, Aaj se main Ramesh hoon. Okay, and note the whom is agreeing with main. So it's first person singular, it's with the subject. I can also instruct like, Aaj se tum Ramesh ho. So you are going to play Ramesh in this play or something, or in this movie. Okay, so 10 is fine. Okay. But if you try to flip that, and if you say, Aaj se Ramesh main hai, or Ramesh main hoon, these are both completely bad. No matter what you do, this is bad. And the same thing with Aaj se Ramesh tum hai and Aaj se Ramesh tum ho. These sentences are so bad that I cannot read them like Hindi sentences. I can only read them word by word. They fail so catastrophically. Okay, so one thing I want to add here is that these sentences, because of scrambling in Hindi, there is a way to read these strings and make them grammatical. So you can say, Aaj se Ramesh main hoon, or Aaj se Ramesh tum ho. But what these mean is, what has happened here, and I don't know if you can hear it, but there is extra stress on main and tum, basically what indicating that the Ramesh has been topicalized. So the subject is still this. So this is basically what I showed you in German, except in German, it was perhaps a little more transparent because of V2, but it's exactly the same thing. So this is, I am Ramesh, but Ramesh has been scrambled. And once you do that scrambling in Hindi, it basically gives you, I am Ramesh, not someone else. From today onwards, Ramesh main hoon, or Aaj se Ramesh tum ho. Okay, so that's it. It basically, the scrambling puts the subject in the focus position. In the immediately pre-verbal position in Hindi is the focus position, and that is what you end up getting. Okay, so like in German, there is a way to indirectly say this, but it's not a copular sentence literally. It is basically what you end up saying. If you want to say he is me, what you can say is, from today he will play my role. So that's in 13, he, my role will play. And of course, in this, you can see that the my and the your are not even arguments of the verb. So nothing dramatic happens, okay? Now, one thing that is kind of interesting is that the 1/2 or the 2/1 contexts do not trigger hierarchy effects. So you can say, aaj se main tum hu or tum main ho. So this is, I am you and you are me. So that's fine. And also 3/3, you don't get these effects. Aaj se Sita Salma hai or Salma Sita hai. Okay, so this is also fine. So 3/3. So this is the whole pattern. Okay, so I'll let you stare at it. Okay, so what you see is, what's bad is 3/participant, 3/1/2. 1/3, 2/3 is fine, 3/3 is fine, and 1, 2, 2, 1 are fine. So that's the way we are going to encode this hierarchy. So once we look at this, we can sort of pull out the following. What's bad is 3/participant. Okay, so that's what's going wrong. So we're not going to really go into this in detail, but there are copular sentences have been kind of popular. People have been studying them, I think, for a long time. But these kinds of copular sentences, assumed identity copular sentences in particular, people have been interested in them. And there's some work by Susanna Behar and Arsalan Kanemoipur, and they look at a very interesting pattern, Eastern Armenian, where what they find is that the agreement basically looks down and just agrees with the thing which has the more marked features. Okay, but that's not what's going on in Hindi. You can see that, because if that was what was happening, then F and G would not be ineffable. You would be able to pronounce them, but you would just use first person agreement. But that's not what happens. It's just bad, okay? So you can't use this. And then there is the idea of defective intervention, but that doesn't quite work either, because elsewhere, I mean, basically 3 can, well, I mean, I think setting that up will take more time, so I'm not going to go into that. Now I'm going to show you one other fact which is not there in German. Okay. So we come back to the question of why do the features of DP2 even matter? Because, and this is a real puzzle, the features, you never find an actual situation where the second DP actually controls agreement. When you see agreement, when you see unambiguous agreement, it is always with the higher sub, with DP1. So why? So this is a bit of a mystery. What is DP2 doing? Like, why should agreement here care at all about the features of DP2? Okay, that's the mystery. So here we kind of play with an idea, with the idea suggested by Wagner and Kuhn, and basically what they point is, look, DP2 is nominative in German and not in English, and that's why that is what is relevant. And we think that they're on the right track, but it goes even further in Hindi. What we can show is that DP2 is also licensed by finite T. And the evidence for this is going to come from infinitival clauses, where there is no finite T. Okay, so let's start first by looking at sort of the basic idea of case licensing in Hindi. So if you have a regular transitive clause, then what you find is that the subject of the regular transitive clause and you make that regular transitive clause into an infinitive, then the subject either becomes big pro or it needs to be genitive. So this is not radically different from what you find in English. Okay, so in English, if you say for John to waste his time is not good, that's fine, but John to waste his time is not good is bad, right? And the standard explanation, one explanation for that is infinitival clauses cannot have overt subjects because you cannot have an overt nominative because there's no source for nominative. Nominative is associated with finite t. Okay, and I should tell you one thing, which is nominative in Hindi has zero realization. There is nothing that you can point to and say this is nominative case. So a nominative case in Hindi really looks like the absence of a case, even though that's not what we will say, but that's what the fact of the matter is. Okay, so here what you see is you cannot say Meena Tina se baat karna zaruri hai, or main Tina se baat karna zaruri hai. So I, to talk with Tina is necessary. If you want to make this work, you've got to put some additional case marking on this. And Hindi infinitives are very nominal in nature, and so genitive appears. So literally what you say is, my talking to Tina is necessary, or Meena's talking to Tina is necessary. Okay, that's how you make it work. Okay, so I'm going to skip this next bit. So now we get to infinitival DP1, DP2 sentences. And here we find something quite surprising. And what we find here is that if you just look at in Copula sentences where DP2 is not a pronoun or a proper name, then they can appear happily in the they can appear happily in an infinitival clause. So look at 20b. Meena's being a teacher is necessary. Meena ka adhyapak hona zaruri hai, or Meena ka adhyapak banna zaruri hai. These are perfectly fine. This nominal adhyapak, teacher, does not create any problems. Okay. However, if you go to an infinitival copular sentence where the DP2, where the lower element is a pronoun, a first or a second person pronoun, those cases are completely bad. Okay. And in fact, actually, I should have put one more example here, which is first and second person pronouns are completely, so yeah, so basically these end up being bad. And what you see here, yeah, so this is the point that I was hoping I had put in here. The pronoun, Hindi doesn't have a distinct set of third person pronouns, it just uses demonstratives. So the word for he, she, it is that. You just use that. So what's interesting is that when you use this pronoun to refer to a human, it's completely impossible here in 21, in this frame. But if you use it to mean it or that, it's okay. So it's not the form which is bad, it's the interpretation. So what we get from this is there is a class of noun phrases in Hindi which need licensing. And those happen to be first person, second person, and pronoun and proper names, and the third person pronoun, but only when it refers to humans. And to a rough approximation, these are also the things in Hindi which can appear, which when you put them in direct object position, they cannot appear on their own. They have to be covered by a shell, which another way of saying that is Hindi has differential object marking. So unlike English, where you can say, I saw him, in Hindi, if you want to say, I saw him, what you say is something like, I saw to him. So you basically take the him, wrap it in a prepositional layer, and then it appears. So there is a class of elements, and this is an idea. The exact implementation of this idea we take from Laura Kalin's work, and what we will basically say is, well, there is Hindi cuts up, and all languages do this, but Hindi cuts up the class of nominals that need licensing. And in Hindi, the class of nominals that need licensing are basically first person pronoun, second person pronoun, third person human pronoun, and proper names, okay, and also specific NPs. And everything else, inanimates, indefinites, they don't need licensing, okay? So what we are seeing here is we take these cases to show us that there is still a place for licensing, okay? So let's continue with this, okay? But now we're going to show you another fact which we have not shown you so far. So far what we showed you was, well, 1/3 is good, 3/1 is bad, okay? So, and the way we did it was we said it's because of person licensing, okay? 3 participant cases are ruled out due to failure of person licensing, and the active ingredient in the explanation is that participant features need to be licensed, okay? But now there's kind of a strange fact, which is all the examples that I showed to you so far were in the present tense. Take exactly the same examples, put them in the past tense, and the effect vanishes, or at least diminishes greatly. So, उस दिन मैं रमेश था और रमेश मैं था. उस दिन तुम रमेश थे और रमेश तुम था. These are much, much better than the present tense examples. Okay, so what's going on? Why do the past and the present differ so radically? So let's look at the auxiliaries. So what's the difference between the present and the past? What's different is the auxiliary. So when you look at the auxiliary, so this is the present auxiliary. And what you see in the present auxiliary is that there are 3 layers. There's 1, 2, 3, right? So there is person inflection. The past, the Hindi past is an old participle. Okay, this is not a surprising thing. This also happens in Slavic languages and so on. So it's an old participle. There's no person inflection. Okay, so the Hindi past just does not do person, right? And the effect goes away. Okay, so it seems that there's something similar happens in German. So in German, we told you that he is me was degraded, but apparently in German, there is syncretism in the past tense between the first and the third, in first person and third person agreement. And apparently 25 is not bad. Okay, so we need realization. We need to talk about realization. It's not just hierarchy. Okay, in fact, it gets more, it's more. So there are environments in Hindi where you can leave the verb unpronounced. Okay, so gapping is one such environment. So gapping is a situation. So we're not going into the formal treatment of gapping, but we are using it descriptively. So you go from SOV and SOV to SOV and SO. So you leave the final verb out. So 26A is bad. आज से मैं रवि हूँ और रवि मैं है is bad, but आज से मैं रवि हूँ और रवि मैं is okay. Likewise with right node raising, and this we used to describe a situation where you go from SOV and SOV to SO and SOV. Okay, so you leave the first verb out. So now if the offending verb is the first verb, then you can leave that out and the example improves. Okay, so now we are in a funny situation because we said our analysis was participant features need to be licensed. If the source of the problem is the participant features, why do they care whether they're in a past tense sentence or whether they're in a gapping sentence or in a right node raising sentence? They should be as happy or as unhappy. I mean, their needs are not being met. So what's the source of the problem? So here there is a very interesting paper that is relevant. And this is a paper, so I told you, right, that syntacticians are obsessed with the person licensing condition. So Omer Preminger sort of looked at this and he said, well, we are all obsessed with this, but there's an embarrassing fact here, which is that person licensing effects, you never, for example, you never find person licensing effects in a language like Chinese, which has no overt agreement. So his generalization is you only find person licensing effects if there are overt clitics, if there is overt agreement. But the explanations, the standard explanations for the person licensing condition never talk about this. They're all in terms of licensing. So there's a conflict there. So he sets up a system which we think, I mean, we like his generalization. We think his system, the way he sets it up is not the most satisfying, but so we move to another system, which is Kuhn and Kinase system. And basically Kuhn and Kinase system, we really see Kuhn and Kinase as a response to Preminger saying, let's take your generalization and try to understand how to make it work in a different way. So Kuhn and Kinase, and this is a paper that has appeared, has the catchy name, Feature Gluttony. So their idea is the following. Licensing, so the background of all of this is licensing is not the problem. The problem is that in certain structural configuration, one head can end up with too many features. And this can cause problems. Okay, it's deceptively simple. It's that is basically the idea. So the source of the problem is not the putative needs of the nominals, but the properties of the agreeing heads. There's technical details here. We will not go into that here, but I'm going to sort of walk you through how the system works for the Hindi data and how it deals with the realization facts. So first, let's look at the participant over participant case. So here's the general idea. You have this, the probe, the tense head says, I'm looking for participant and I'm looking for, so I'm looking for participants. And as long, if I can get participant features right away, then I'm all set. But if I don't get participant features, then I will keep looking. So that's part one. Part two says, well, anytime I look at something, I will copy all of its features, not just, so this is an important part, that copying is coarse. So when you investigate, when you look into a DP, you just copy all of its features. Okay, so let's see how this works. So T is looking for, in Hindi, is looking for participant features. So let's look at this configuration, participant over participant. So let's say we look at this configuration. Yeah, so in this case, actually, let me see. I should actually, I don't know why I have A and B here. I should not have A and B here, but this is the important case. So in this case, I start looking from above. I find DP1, and DP1 is participant, it's first person. I copy all of the features of DP1. At this time, at this point, my agreement needs are met. And I don't copy any more features. Okay. So there is no conflict. So I do not, so in all of these configurations, so this is participant over participant, and also this is participant over non-participant. But as long as the first DP has participant features, the probe will never go past the first DP because it will have all of its agreement needs met on the first DP. And that's what's happening in 31. Let's look at a sort of a bad situation. The bad situation is this one, is the 3 over participant situation. So in this case, what happens is I start looking. I'm looking for participant. I find DP1. I don't find participant features here. Okay. But there are still some features here, and I copy those features. So I copy all of the features of DP1 onto my node. Then I find DP2. And DP2, I'm like, okay, finally I found participant features. Okay, so now I copy all of those features. So now I have a situation where I have 2 sets of features. I have the features of DP1 and I have the features of DP2. And this situation is what Kuhn and Kaine call a gluttonous situation. So he has ended up with with 2 sets of features, and this can cause trouble. And I stress, can cause trouble. It doesn't necessarily cause trouble, but it can cause trouble. Okay, and we'll see. Okay, so why might this cause trouble? So let's look at Hindi, right? So let me just go back to our table here. Suppose you end up with first singular and third singular features. What are you going to do? There is no exponent which will allow you to simultaneously expone first singular and third singular. That's the source of the badness. Okay. You put these 2 things together and the system just says, I can't do it. Okay. However, now look at German. In this situation in German, you will put together third singular, first singular, and in the past tense, it just happens to be the case that German says, I have this thing which can do third singular and it can also do first singular in the past tense. And so there's no problem. So this is how you bring in, so the idea is that the explanation, this is an explanation that is a syntactic explanation, but where the badness, the ungrammaticality does not come from the syntax. The ungrammaticality comes from the realizational resources of the language. And now you can also see, given this perspective, why you would, let's assume you have a language with no agreement, with no overt agreement. Let's assume, I mean, I have not actually investigated Copula sentences in Mandarin, so I might be wrong, but the prediction of the system is that you should not get hierarchy effects because you will just not see any inflection. Okay, so you'll have third person features, first person features. Since you're not going to realize any of them, there's not going to be any clash. So the important idea is that feature gluttony is not in and of itself fatal. Gluttony in the syntax is not a bad thing at all. I mean, it's as far as the syntax is concerned, it's like, fine, you have 2 sets of features. In fact, syntax will often create gluttonous situations. Whether those situations lead to ungrammaticality or not will depend on things that happen downstream. For example, is there an exponent can realize both? Okay. Now let's look at how the 2 cases that we talked about for Hindi will work. So for the Hindi-Urdu past tense copula, there's actually, the Hindi-Urdu past tense is, the absence of person there is not quite syncretism. Because, I mean, we take syncretism to be something that is potentially accidental. But this is something much more systematic. There just is no person feature anywhere in the past paradigm. So one thing you could do for there is to just say, well, there is no person probe. Okay, so that would be like a Preminger style treatment where we would say you don't, it's kind of like WYSIWYG. If you don't see person features anywhere, then there is no person probe. Okay, why would the learner necessarily postulate a person probe when there is no person feature to be seen? You could say, well, maybe uniformity concerns, but one line is to say there's no person probe. Another line is to say, yeah, there is a person probe, but at the end, it doesn't matter because when you're realizing person features don't matter. So you could go either way. With gapping, right node raising, you'd have to say something different. You'd have to say, well, you've created this horrible object, right? First person singular, third person singular, but then you're saved at the last minute because you don't have to pronounce it. Okay, so I think you see this, like there's a name for this, like salvation by deletion or something, right? So you're not pronounced, so there's no problem. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Just one more thing, what happens in the 3/3? In the 3/3, you're looking for participant, you don't find participant, but so you take the third person features, but then you look at, maybe you look at the next element, but that doesn't give you anything, it doesn't improve your lot, so you don't copy anything more. Okay, so the idea is that additional copying only takes place if it increases the features that you want, right? And that doesn't happen. So in this case, this does not lead to gluttony. You only copy the features of the first DP, and that's that. Okay, so some further, so I'm now basically, I'm going to conclude and I'll point out some things which are in the background that I've not had time to talk about. So the first thing is that we are going to separate agreement versus case licensing. So in our system, so recall the licensing data that if you try to say something like, I am him, and you try to put that in the infinitive, it goes bad. And so the idea is that case licensing, T is going to case license all of the DPs in its domain. But so case licensing is going to go further, and agreement, so case licensing will delimit the space in which agreement can obtain. So case licensing, so what we are saying is that, in a Copula sentence, T is case licensing both the DPs, but in all of the good situations, which is the non-gluttonous situations, it's only agreeing with the first one, because the first one is enough to satisfy the agreement needs of T. So the agreement and case licensing, they're working on a very similar system, but they're not identical. So we're not reducing one to the other. Another issue is that unlike, so Kuhn and Keine and Wagner reveal that it's not just person mismatch, but apparently in German, you also they identify number mismatches. So in Hindi, we have gender, number, and person. We did not find any gender mismatches. Number mismatches were kind of, the data was unstable. I think more work needs to be done. So we don't analyze these, but we have a way of thinking about this, which is that if these things are genuinely absent, it might just tell us that the gender number probes are not articulated. So basically when they start looking, they just take the first DP. So unlike, one might imagine, right, that just in the same way that participant is above non-participant, plural should be above singular, and feminine, let's say, should be above masculine because the masculine is the default, but that's not necessary. And that, it seems that's not the case. And then how does the system extend to things outside Copula context? And the answer is yes, but you need to add a theory of differential object marking, which say the theory that Kalin has. And one interesting result of this is that unlike what both of us, Sakshi and I, had kind of assumed in earlier work, we end up with a treatment where there is only one structural case licensor in Hindi. which is finite t, and little v, transitive little v on its own actually does not license any case at all. So you actually have situations where you have two DPs, just like in the Copula sentence and configuration, which are both being case licensed by T. And this is kind of non-standard. In classic case theory, there was always this one-to-one relationship between a case licensor and a licensee. Okay, and we end up departing from that. Okay, so to conclude, we still need licensing, but not for person hierarchies. So in a way, so we agree with Kuhn and Kaine that you don't actually need to talk about person licensing in order to handle hierarchy effects, but you can't completely get rid of licensing requirements. And what we have found here offers support to a very interesting demonstration made by Laura Kalin in her 2018 syntax paper on differential object marking. She looks at Senaya, a Neo-Aramaic language, and what she says there is specific objects need to be licensed. And the way licensing works in Senaya is via agreement. And then what she notes is in perfective sentences, there's no object agreement. And the next step is perfective sentences don't allow specific objects. Okay, so it's in a way similar to what we have. We ran into this in copular sentences, where in non-finite copular sentences, where we showed that DP2 needed licensing and it went bad. She found this in perfective sentences, but it's the same idea. And again, what's interesting is that this licensing is not hierarchy related. So this is independent needs of particular NPs, particular nominals. We still need to meet those, but that's different from hierarchy. Okay, thank you.
Wow, that was very deep, very profound, so many cool data points. Thank you so much, Rajesh. Really nice talk. I think I followed most of it, except for the very end with the conclusion and the further issues. I think I just made it out a bit.
Well, yeah. Sorry, the further issues are very telegraphic, right? So they're sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I might need some time to collect my own thoughts. I have a lot of questions in my head, but let's just see if we have some questions here. I like to give the word first to our MA and PhD students. Maybe sometimes they have comprehension questions, so I just ask them. Oh, it's shaking. But Julio has a question. Why don't do you want to come up here? And
if you can hear me properly, can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can hear you, Julio.
You don't need to see me. Mine is just couple of questions. So the first one has to do with, you mentioned Mandarin, where agreement is basically absent, but I was wondering about languages or varieties that lack copulas altogether. So I assume the prediction there, unless there's some sort of haplology issue with pronouns or anything, which I don't think would be the problem with the first and the second and third and so on. The prediction in principle would be that those should be fine, right? As the copula doesn't exist, presumably, I don't know.
Yes, I would, and Sakshi, you should correct me if you disagree, or yeah, if you want to add anything. Yeah, so yes, I would. I should add a caveat. I have not looked at we have not looked at such cases, but yes, that is the logic of our system says, if you're not pronouncing anything, and I'm assuming that in languages with in the null copula cases, there isn't even any tense information. So because that does seem to be the case, right? I've seen that in some null copula languages, if you change the tense, some copular information becomes available. And so the prediction would be when this tense inflectional information, when that kicks in, if it kicks in, then you might expect these effects. But in cases where all you get is DP1, DP2, our prediction is that you should not get these effects. And if you do get those effects, then, well, then we're in trouble.
Then the second point is, you mentioned the idea that, you know, when you have gapping, for instance, the problem vanishes, or at least, you know, it's not as bad. It remedied to a certain extent. So then my question is, what's your assumption? That there is some sort of rescue by PF deletion effect to such an I mean, in the sense that, okay, you have the verb would create a problem. This is kind of marked, say, a star. Then you get to the PF component, the phonetic form, and there's some sort of filter that says, oh, I'm sorry, you get deleted because otherwise this crashes. Is that the assumption you're making, or?
No, it's slightly different. It's slightly different. There is no star. The syntax is not even aware that it's bad. Syntax just is ready to hand it off to PF, except that, and if it actually handed it off to PF, bad things would happen in some of the gluttonous configurations, but you're saved because it's not handed over to PF, right? So however we get the non-realization, yeah, that's what we would say. So in a way, I mean, we are not even, all that is, in fact, actually, I should retreat a little bit and say, we're not even necessarily assuming that this object is there and is not pronounced. What we are saying is, let's assume it's there. Even if it's there, it doesn't get pronounced, and so there's no problem. But for example, right, for gapping, we know treatments of gapping, right, where the second, like where one of the verb moves up and then it's only associated with the higher tense and not the lower tense. So then in that case, the gluttonous configuration would not come to be at all. But that's okay for us. What we are saying is one way or the other. So, but maybe for right node raising, I think we have more reasons to believe that the other, it might be a more late phenomena. So maybe it's there, but it's just at the end of the day, it's not pronounced.
Right.
And since it's not pronounced, that's what saves us. But I again want to highlight that the syntax, the badness is never in the syntax. So this is different from ECP violations, right, which get fixed by ellipsis, right, where there is a violation in the syntax, which you are rescued from. In this case, the syntax is perfectly happy. The syntax is not aware. So gluttony is not even a feature that there's no gluttonous feature. There's nothing in the syntax which says, oh, I'm looking for gluttonous probes. It just is an accident. It's something that happens. And as far as we can tell, syntax is fine with it.
So you don't see it as necessarily as a salvation operation that takes place precisely for that. It's just those contexts where this guy doesn't show up, no problem arises, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a very good point. Yeah, that it is not a salvation operation. Right. It's just that if it's not pronounced, things might be good, but there is nothing to.
Right. It's not done on purpose because
yes,
I'm wrong. Delete me, and I won't be a troublemaker anymore.
Exactly. So yeah, thank you for that point. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I might just add something, so it's not just that it's not pronounced. It's just that it cannot ever be pronounced because we don't have any exponent which can realize that both those sets of features simultaneously. Mm-hmm. Because that is completely out of the picture. So it's not a more phonological or other kind of deletion of that thing, because it's just not ever. There's no form. The morphology. There's no lexical entry corresponding to both those features simultaneously. Mm-hmm. You can think of it like that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it is conceivable that some language might have a way of dealing with multiple features. So you could imagine that a language somewhere could. Okay, so I mean, I'm now thinking of Eastern Armenian. it is conceivable that in Eastern, so Eastern Armenian is the language where it looks like you look at DP1 and DP2 and you realize the most marked feature. So, so you could imagine that that's what Armenian, so if we think of Eastern Armenian within gluttony, maybe a way out would be that Eastern Armenian, when it goes to pronounce, unlike Hindi, it doesn't throw up its hands. It says, I have two features, I'm just going to pronounce the more marked one. So that's a possibility within our system.
Any other questions?
Do you want to check the chat?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Emily, please unmute yourself.
Thanks. Hi, both. Thanks so much for the talk. Right, interesting, cool stuff. I have one of my questions is just, have you thought of this in kind of a more syntactic approach? I'm thinking of Amy Rose's account, like her proposal with interaction and satisfaction, just because I think it kind of gets a lot of the facts. I mean, it doesn't really handle the surfacey morphological stuff. So then I'm not saying that, you should adopt that analysis, but I'm just wondering if maybe part of what you're showing is that the PCC type effects don't all have the same source. They just, maybe some truly have a syntactic source about, some kind of probe specific thing. Whereas other types of hierarchy effects are purely morphological, or whether we should really be looking for one underlying source for all of them, I guess, and all of its guises.
So I think we just got stuck on the realizational facts and we never emerged from them. So because the way we presented the paper is also kind of at first we did the licensing, and then we realized, there's these realizational facts, and then we never quite emerged from them. So, but yes, there is one thing that I think a point that Amy Rose makes, which I want to go back to, which is that while when you do the realizational tricks that we talked about, the examples are much better, but I would not say that they are absolutely perfect. I still wince a little bit on even in the past tense, right, where there's no problem. The 3/2 and the 3/1, I always feel like I would never put a star, but I always feel so. Right now, the realizational approach gives us no way to model that, right? So and this is a point that Amy Rose makes, which is that, like, look, if it's all realizational, then you should expect some of these effects to completely vanish, but you don't. So I think maybe there might be a way to think about, but what we would need there is a way of, tuning the strengths, and that, which is that this realizational effect is a very strong effect. And then this the pure hierarchy effect, independent of realization, is much, much weaker. So this is actually a place where, while there is no need to do experimental work on to show that 3/1 in the present tense is bad, but maybe experimentation might reveal that 3/, in the past tense, is not perfect. It's not as perfect as our treatment is suggesting. So yes, so that's so I think this is a good idea. We have not done we have not very seriously engaged with Amy Rose's model, but I think this might be a good time, now that we have a way to talk about these, to go back and think about the residual effect, which we only kind of allude to, which we don't really model. Sakshi, do you have thoughts about this?
No, I was thinking that then it might be relevant to also think about the variability with number. Okay, because with number also, that's one of the things that happen when you have a plural over singular, argument, you get this same kind of variability that you kind of get in the past. Like we are always not 100% sure. Okay, and we found like within the group of people that we looked at, some of them said that they're getting the badness, others said they aren't. So there is some complexity that definitely needs to be taken care of there.
Yeah, and so.
Any other questions or even written questions in the chat that we can read out loud? I'm Richard. Yeah, Julio. Go ahead, Julio. Sorry.
I have one general question, maybe one more specific one.
Mm-hmm.
I start with the most specific one that is just above 3 for your further issues. You deal with this point A, the past tense, and B, the gapping and right not racing, but you also have these super interesting facts with non-finite clause. So I think that was in 21. I don't remember it, but it was something like my being Mina. I think that would be a sentence.
Yes.
So if I take 22b, for instance, and turn it into something, my being Mina is necessary. So I have 1 participant before 3, but in a non-finite context, would you not also expect that this becomes, good or bad according to the mechanism that you're proposing there? So it just seemed to me like this is the third point in your list.
My being Veena, so the idea here is that what's going wrong in 22 is independent of the hierarchy. So it doesn't matter what the higher element is. This is just going bad because Veena is not being case licensed, and Veena needs in Hindi. So this is a point where, so I should mention the corresponding sentence in German is okay. So I think something like, it is not easy to be me, in German is fine. But in Hindi, this is really bad. And the idea is that this element also needs case licensing. And since that is not available, this is going bad, not because, so there is no person hierarchy effect here because there's no agreement. Since there's no agreement, in fact, this is one of the points that Preminger makes, that you take all of the classic PCC, person hierarchy effects, and put them in infinitival clauses where agreement vanishes or diminishes, and boom, the effect goes away. But here, what we see is this is not a hierarchy effect. This is another this is a pure licensing effect, and it stays. And it doesn't depend upon the features of the higher element.
So there is no way to use these non-finite facts and also combine them with the mechanism you're proposing, because because we think this is just a different thing. This is the licensing of individual nominals, and the licensing of individual nominals is basically, we still need that. And then there's the participant licensing for hierarchical, to derive hierarchy. And it seems that at least in the cases, in this case and some of the cases that Kuhn and Kaine look at, you don't need to talk about licensing. So those are the 2 directions that we are pointing to.
I will add something here. So, like historically in the direction that this work has taken, the classic approach has been that whatever these effects are, they are driven by the needs of the nominals. Okay, so that's like your classic PLC and other licensing conditions, whatever formulation you adopt. The other approach that has been there and, primarily represented in this feature gluttony kind of analysis is that we don't care about the needs of the nominals, it's about the needs of the probe. The probe has particular features and, it ends up picking too many things, and it's all about the probe. So not at all about licensing. So, you know, they've been going in opposite directions and placing the onus of the explanation on the needs of different elements in the structure and saying only one matters. And what we are showing here is that there is a place for licensing and that's independent, and there is a place for agreement and that's independent. And so you have to pay attention both to the needs of the nominals and to the needs of the probe. If you leave any one thing out, you won't get the full picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just thought it would be cool to maybe have a third point of evidence that you, or a third data point that would also be explained with the same mechanism. But of course, if there are independent reasons why.
Right. No, but this idea of licensing, right? I mean, we are not, we show it here, but then this is kind of the last point that I had, right? Like what we're saying about licensing here, is it just something we need to say for Copula sentences? The answer is no. It's actually completely, once you start with this point, then you can see differential object marking in Hindi as a response to the same phenomena, basically, which is that certain elements will not get licensed ordinarily, and so therefore you need to put them, therefore you need to add a licensor. So it would be not very satisfying to just have to make a claim about licensing purely on Copula sentences. So then in the broader proposal, we extend it to the overall syntax of Hindi, which is that they're following Kalin, there is a class of elements that languages cut up their nominals into two camps, things that must be licensed and things that don't need licensing but can be licensed. And those are the kinds of guys. And as it happens, the DP2 in an assumed identity sentence, right? The second DP is always an individual. It's always you, me, him, Tina, right? So that's the space of things, right? And those are the kinds of things that need to be licensed. Those are the kinds of things which in Hindi, if you were to put them in the direct object position, would always require more stuff. They would never be happy as direct objects. So that's the idea.
My second more general question is, I mean, I haven't even really formulated in my head yet, but it says something like, this is all very mechanical, nice syntactic, rigid, mathematical technology, but it seems to me there's a whole layer of additional factors that influence these judgments on top of it, processing and things like amelioration effects, for instance. I first saw this German sentence, er ist ich, he is I, and I thought, yeah, it sounds bad, and I get the right interpretation, so I think. But then, for instance, once I saw the past sentence, er war ich, he was I, then immediately thinking about the present again, it's not so bad anymore. So the more you look at these sentences, the better they get. And there is this whole question of plausibility of the sentence. So for instance, I need to have my topicalized position in German. It needs to be some sort of salience. It needs to be emphatic. Why would this I, in this predicative structure be salient? But for instance, if I change it into something, maybe also this is, I think, the reason why English changed the I to me in the first place. So he is me, it needs to be, or in the first sentence you showed with the er ist meine Wenigkeit, you need some sort of reason, some emphasis on the predicate. So if I change it to something like this one over there, and I, that's pretty good, I think. Der da bin ich. Er ist ich, he is me, he is I, that's pretty bad, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure it's just purely those syntactic ones. There's a whole, the contextual, the pragmatics of it. You know, all of that surrounding these grammaticality judgments, and that don't really find an easy way into this mechanical syntactic analysis. So I guess my question is, on a very abstract level, how do you conceptualize the relationship between pragmatic factors and these rigid syntactic mechanisms? How does
I'll between the two of us, Sakshi is the psycholinguist, so I'll let Sakshi start. I might add something, but like Sakshi should start.
Honestly, this is a very difficult question to answer, and because, you know, the variability that might be there This is something that has to be probed. We haven't looked at it. This is something that's on the cards. For now, I think I would not do the paper by Kuhn, Kaine and Wagner and say that I think they did a good job in terms of trying to set up that first experiment and identifying the limits of the variability there. But honestly, this will take some careful work, because for instance, I was like trying to talk to my undergrad syntax students about these kinds of examples, and we ran into the same kinds of problems that you're saying. They were just like so confused about why I care about these weird contexts. So that's something to work on. I think the number contexts were actually a bit easier in the sense of plausibility for sure. But then, at the same time, the judgments are clearer for person among the few people that we tested and less clear for number. So it's complex at the, I think that's all I can say at this point. So there's more to do here for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, my understanding is that at least like some of the core cases are, the judgments, as I said, are sharper in Hindi than in German, because like in German, it seems you can, I mean, if you look at the Kuhn, Kaine and Wagner data, right, you see that there is much more, there is variability. But on the other hand, yeah, I mean, I think what Sakshi is saying is right. Like, maybe we just don't think there is variability because we haven't done the experiment, right? If you do experiments, you find variability. That's a fact of life. So yeah, so maybe, but I think what this is, we can see this as kind of giving, I guess, the limiting conditions on the variation, and then we would be very surprised if these facts vanished. But I think what we would find is that there's further gradation. So for example, with the number facts, we think maybe depending upon the morphological shape of the noun might play a role also in a way that we have not really engaged with here. But yeah, and one side note here, that it's kind of, the assumed identity context is, compared to many other copular contexts, is much more circumscribed. So there is some hope at least of pinning things down, because otherwise, right, there are, in copular sentences can be very tricky, right? You have the presentational ones, specificational ones. So it's kind of very, very important to pin things down, because the nice thing here is that at least we can separate DP1, DP2 from DP2, DP1. The meaning is very different. And so at least we have some hope of the meaning, we believe gives us a direct window into the underlying structure. And so then we can do some syntactic theorizing. But I think the point that you're making, right, about that is well taken. And yeah, we will just need to do, eventually we need to do some experiments here.
I also think the difference between Hindi and German, the very fact that it exists, the certainty of the grammatical judgments, speaks very much to this problem I'm trying to raise. Yeah. So do you have any hope of capturing the subtlety and the difference of the certainty using a model like the one you're proposing? Excuse me, this is very, very difficult. Or maybe it already follows, at least for some cases, because you do have a very clear prediction here in terms of what's grammatical and what isn't.
Yeah, so but the thing is that, like, yeah, so the interesting question in a way is, at least for Hindi in the clear cases, right? So our system, so maybe the issue is what's going on in German, right? Like what, maybe, why are the judgments not sharper in German? And that's that, so that I want to go back and read, do Kuhn and Kaine, Sakshi, do you remember, do Kuhn and Kaine discuss their German data, or they discuss the Hindi data, because the Hindi data, the judgments are clearer. But I don't know if they actually discuss the, yeah, maybe they don't.
I don't remember off the top of my head. We'll have to check that. Yeah. I mean, but like I will still say that, okay, in the syntax paper, we have tested a very small sample of people, and to really get a handle on the variability ourselves, we will need to test a larger population with number. We got 2 groups. So there might be some issue with, different grammars going on. That also comes into the picture. And at present, it's not possible to separate those things out. But if the judgments are more variable for person in German, it's a matter of what the grammatical, for lack of a better word, parameter might be.
Yeah, yeah, or it may, I mean, one other possibility is that, I mean, at that point is that maybe German speakers are manipulating, like I mean, they're going back and forth between grammars, where a grammar where you have, which is like an English-like grammar, which doesn't care about the hierarchy, right? And a Hindi-like grammar, and then they are basically, I mean, however you do, ultimately, right, we have to have tools to model variation, right? And a popular tool is to have this kind of like, the kind of thing that people at Penn do, right? Like where you have like these 2 multiple grammars and then you sample from them at various rates. And then that basically, so that would be an idea.
Also really, really fascinating. Thank you so much again for coming to agreeing to giving this talk. I wish you could be here so we could invite you to a glass of wine.
Yeah. I'm going to miss out on the wine and cheese. Yeah.
It's a fun time. Very, very stimulating. Great talk. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for coming. We're going over to the common room now for a chat. Thank you again. And
okay, enjoy the wine on our behalf. Drink another glass. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Yeah. Bye.